The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Prince Charles adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the third time. Today was not just any ordinary day in the life of the British royal family. Spain's King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia were arriving for their first official state visit since Charles had become king, and everything had to be perfect. Charles had been preparing for this moment for weeks. The diplomatic relationship between Britain and Spain had always been delicate, with centuries of history weighing on every interaction. Gibraltar remained a sensitive topic. Brexit had created new tensions, and both nations were eager to show that royal diplomacy could bridge political gaps. This visit was meant to strengthen ties and demonstrate unity between two European monarchies. The King's private secretary, Sir Edward Morrison, had briefed Charles multiple times on Spanish royal protocol. Unlike some European courts, the Spanish monarchy maintained very specific greeting customs that dated back centuries. The traditional Spanish royal greeting involved a particular sequence of bows, handshakes, and air kisses that had to be performed with precise timing and positioning. "Your Majesty must remember," Sir Edward had explained during their final rehearsal the previous evening. "King Felipe expects the traditional abrazo greeting, a firm handshake followed by a brief embrace with 3 kisses, right cheek first, then left, then right again. Queen Letizia follows with a more formal curtsy acknowledgement, then the 2-kiss greeting typical of Spanish high society." Charles nodded, but privately wondered why royal greetings had to be so complicated. During his decades as Prince of Wales, he had mastered dozens of different international greeting protocols, from the deep bows required in Japan to the specific handshake techniques preferred by various African leaders. Each culture had its own intricate dance of diplomacy expressed through these first moments of contact. The Spanish delegation had arrived at Heathrow Airport earlier that morning, where they were met by the Earl Marshal and a carefully orchestrated welcome ceremony. Now, they were traveling through London in the state carriages, giving thousands of well-wishers lining the streets a chance to wave and cheer. The British public loved royal pageantry, and the presence of glamorous foreign royalty only added to the excitement. Back at the palace, Charles reviewed the detailed schedule one more time. The formal greeting would take place in the grand entrance hall, witnessed by senior members of both royal households, government officials, and carefully selected members of the press. Every moment would be photographed, analyzed, and reported around the world. Royal watchers would scrutinize every gesture for signs of warmth, respect, or tension between the two nations. Queen Camilla joined her husband in the anteroom adjacent to the grand entrance hall. She looked elegant in a deep blue dress specifically chosen to complement the Spanish flag colors, a subtle diplomatic touch suggested by the palace's protocol team. Her jewelry included a brooch that had belonged to Queen Victoria, connecting the present moment to the long history of British-Spanish royal relations. "Are you nervous, darling?" Camilla asked, adjusting Charles's ceremonial sash. "Not nervous exactly," Charles replied, "but aware that every detail matters. Felipe is a good man, and Letizia brings such intelligence and grace to their monarchy. I want them to feel genuinely welcomed, not just formally received." The sound of carriage wheels on gravel announced the arrival of the Spanish delegation. Palace staff immediately sprang into action with the precision of a military operation. Footmen took their positions, photographers checked their equipment, and security personnel made final sweeps of the area. Charles and Camilla moved to their designated positions in the grand entrance hall. The room itself was magnificent, with its soaring ceiling, marble columns, and portraits of previous monarchs gazing down from gilded frames. Fresh flowers have been arranged in massive displays featuring roses, the national flower of England, and carnations representing Spain. Through the tall windows, Charles could see the Spanish state carriage approaching the main entrance. King Felipe VI, tall and distinguished in his naval uniform, was visible beside Queen Letizia, who wore an elegant cream-colored coat and matching hat. Both looked every inch the modern European royalty they represented, young, sophisticated, and comfortable with the global spotlight. The palace doors opened with ceremonial grandeur, and the Spanish royals stepped into the entrance hall. This was the moment Charles had prepared for, the crucial first interaction that would set the tone for the entire visit. He stepped forward confidently, his years of royal training guiding his movements as he prepared to execute the perfect Spanish royal greeting that would demonstrate Britain's respect for Spanish traditions and strengthen the bonds between their two nations. As King Felipe VI stepped across the threshold of Buckingham Palace, Charles moved forward with practiced confidence. The Spanish king looked impressive in his ceremonial naval uniform, decorated with the sash of the Order of the Golden Fleece, while Queen Letizia radiated elegance in her carefully chosen ensemble that perfectly balanced formality with modern sophistication. The assembled dignitaries held their breath as the two monarchs approached each other. Representatives from both governments watched closely, knowing that photographs of this moment would appear on front pages across Europe. The British ambassador to Spain stood alongside his Spanish counterpart, both men acutely aware of how important these symbolic gestures were to international relations. Charles extended his hand toward Felipe, beginning what he believed to be the correct Spanish royal greeting protocol. He had rehearsed this sequence dozens of times with Sir Edward, but something felt different in the actual moment. The lighting in the grand entrance hall was brighter than during their practice sessions, and the presence of so many observers created an energy that hadn't existed during the private rehearsals. Instead of the firm handshake followed by the traditional abrazo embrace, Charles found himself momentarily confused about the exact positioning. Felipe, expecting the Spanish greeting sequence, stepped slightly to his left to facilitate the customary three-kiss greeting. However, Charles, suddenly uncertain about which cheek to approach first, moved in the same direction. What happened next unfolded in slow motion for everyone watching. Both kings, trying to be respectful of each other's protocols, ended up moving toward the same side at exactly the same moment. Instead of the smooth, diplomatic dance they had both intended, they nearly collided as each tried to accommodate what they thought the other expected. Felipe, with characteristic Spanish grace, attempted to correct the positioning by stepping back and to his right. Charles, recognizing that something had gone wrong, also tried to adjust by moving in what he thought was the appropriate direction. Unfortunately, this created an awkward moment where both monarchs were essentially trying to lead the same dance, resulting in a brief but noticeable confusion about who should move where. The assembled photographers captured every second of this unexpected choreographic challenge. Camera flashes illuminated the scene as two of Europe's most experienced royals found themselves in the unusual position of being uncertain about something as fundamental as a greeting. Both men were accustomed to flawless protocol execution, making this moment all the more surprising. Queen Letizia, displaying the poise that had made her one of Europe's most respected royal consorts, remained perfectly positioned and ready to continue with her own greeting sequence once the situation resolved itself. Her expression showed no sign of concern or embarrassment, demonstrating the kind of diplomatic composure that royal training instills. Queen Camilla, watching from her position nearby, recognized immediately what was happening. She had witnessed enough royal greetings to understand that even the most experienced monarchs occasionally found themselves caught between different protocol expectations. Her slight smile conveyed both understanding and reassurance to anyone who might be worried about the diplomatic implications. Sir Edward Morrison felt his carefully planned schedule suddenly hanging in the balance. As the king's private secretary, he knew that royal protocol existed precisely to prevent these kinds of awkward moments. Every detail had been rehearsed, every movement choreographed. Yet here, they were facing an unscripted situation that no amount of preparation had anticipated. The Spanish ambassador to Britain, Don Carlos Martinez, maintained his diplomatic composure while internally calculating how to frame this moment in his report back to Madrid. These encounters between heads of state were always delicate, and any suggestion of disrespect or cultural insensitivity could have lasting consequences for bilateral relations. What made the situation particularly challenging was that both Charles and Felipe were genuinely trying to honor each other's customs. Charles wanted to demonstrate Britain's respect for Spanish traditions, while Felipe was attempting to show flexibility and understanding of British preferences. Their mutual courtesy was actually creating the confusion, as each monarch deferred to what he believed the other expected. The moment stretched on for what felt like minutes, but was actually only a few seconds. Palace staff, trained to remain invisible during such ceremonies, maintained their positions while internally wondering if they should somehow intervene. The protocol for addressing royal greeting mishaps wasn't covered in any manual they had studied. Members of the press, initially concerned about capturing the perfect diplomatic photograph, suddenly realized they were witnessing something much more interesting, a genuinely human moment between two world leaders trying their best to show mutual respect. The images they were capturing would tell a very different story than the formal, staged photographs typically associated with state visits. Felipe, drawing on his experience as a constitutional monarch who had navigated countless diplomatic situations, made the decision that would resolve the impasse. With a warm laugh that immediately transformed the atmosphere, he stepped back and opened his arms in a gesture that was universally understood, regardless of specific protocol requirements. Felipe's spontaneous laughter broke through the formal atmosphere like sunshine piercing storm clouds. His genuine amusement at their shared predicament immediately transformed what could have been a diplomatic embarrassment into a moment of authentic human connection. The Spanish king's warm chuckle was infectious, and Charles felt his own tension dissolve as he recognized the absurdity of their situation. "My friend," Felipe said in English, his voice carrying both warmth and gentle humor, "perhaps we should simply embrace as two neighbors who are happy to see each other, yes?" Charles's face lit up with relief and appreciation for Felipe's diplomatic wisdom. "Absolutely right," he responded, stepping forward with renewed confidence. Sometimes the best protocol is no protocol at all. The two monarchs then shared what would later be described by royal correspondents as one of the most genuine embraces ever witnessed in the grand entrance hall of Buckingham Palace. It wasn't the formal abrazo dictated by Spanish royal tradition, nor was it the reserved handshake typical of British ceremony. Instead, it was a warm, friendly hug between two men who understood the pressures of monarchy and could appreciate the humor in their shared mistake. The assembled dignitaries, who had been holding their collective breath during the initial confusion, now relaxed visibly. Several members of both royal households exchanged knowing glances, recognizing that what they had just witnessed was far more valuable than any perfectly executed protocol sequence. This spontaneous moment of connection would actually serve the diplomatic relationship much better than rigid formality ever could. Queen Letizia stepped forward to greet Charles with perfect composure, as if nothing unusual had happened. Her training as both a former journalist and a queen consort had taught her to adapt gracefully to unexpected situations. She offered Charles a warm smile and executed a flawless curtsy, followed by the traditional two-kiss greeting that proceeded without any confusion whatsoever. "Your Majesty," she said to Charles in her clear, educated English, "Felipe and I are absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you for such a warm welcome to your beautiful palace." Charles, now completely recovered from his earlier uncertainty, responded with his characteristic charm. "The pleasure is entirely ours, Your Majesty. And please call me Charles. We're going to be spending considerable time together over the next few days, and I hope we can be comfortable with each other." Queen Camilla's greeting with the Spanish royals proceeded smoothly, as she had been carefully observing the resolution of Charles's situation and adapted accordingly. Her extensive experience as a senior royal had taught her to read social dynamics quickly and respond appropriately. She embraced Queen Letizia warmly and exchanged pleasantries about the beautiful autumn weather in London. The photographers, initially concerned about capturing images that might suggest diplomatic tension, now had something much more valuable: pictures that showed authentic friendship and mutual respect between European leaders. The sequence of confused movements followed by genuine laughter and warm embraces would create a narrative that PR specialists could only dream of orchestrating. Sir Edward Morrison breathed a quiet sigh of relief as he watched the greeting ceremony get back on track. Royal protocol existed to provide structure and prevent misunderstandings, but sometimes human nature trumped formal procedures in the most wonderful ways. He made a mental note to brief future royal visitors that flexibility and humor were just as important as precise execution of traditional customs. The Spanish delegation, led by their foreign minister, exchanged formal greetings with senior British government officials while the monarchs continued their conversation. The initial awkwardness had actually created an opportunity for more relaxed interaction, as everyone present had witnessed the very human moment shared by their leaders. "I must confess," Charles said to Felipe as they moved toward the staterooms, "that I spent considerable time rehearsing the traditional Spanish greeting, but somehow managed to overthink it when the moment arrived. I hope you'll forgive an old man's nervousness about getting everything perfect for such important guests." Felipe laughed again, clearly enjoying the conversation. "My friend, you should see some of my attempts at other nations' protocols. Last year in Tokyo, I bowed so deeply that I nearly lost my balance. The Japanese emperor was very gracious about it, but I'm certain the photographers captured some very undignified images." This exchange of stories about protocol mishaps created an immediate bond between the two kings. They discovered they shared not only the challenges of modern monarchy, but also the ability to laugh at themselves when things didn't go according to plan. Queen Letizia and Queen Camilla, walking slightly behind them, could be heard having their own animated conversation about the pressures of royal appearances and the relief of meeting people who understood those unique challenges. As they entered the blue drawing room for the traditional exchange of gifts ceremony, the atmosphere was markedly different from what anyone had expected. Instead of the formal, slightly stiff interaction typical of state visits, there was a genuine warmth and camaraderie that would characterize the entire visit. The greeting mishap had inadvertently created exactly the kind of personal connection that diplomats work for years to establish. The gift exchange ceremony in the blue drawing room proceeded with the newfound warmth that had emerged from the greeting mishap. Charles presented Felipe with a specially commissioned piece of English porcelain depicting scenes from both British and Spanish maritime history, symbolizing the long relationship between their seafaring nations. Felipe, in turn, offered Charles an exquisite Toledo steel ceremonial sword, crafted by artisans who had been perfecting their craft for over 5 centuries. "This sword," Felipe explained, "represents not just Spanish craftsmanship, but our belief in the strength that comes from friendship between nations. May it remind you that Spain considers Britain a true ally and friend." Charles examined the beautiful weapon with genuine appreciation, noting the intricate engravings that told the story of Spanish exploration and discovery. "This is magnificent, Felipe. It will hold a place of honor in the royal collection, and every time I see it, I'll remember this visit and the friendship we're building here." The exchange of gifts between Queen Letizia and Queen Camilla was equally meaningful. Letizia presented Camilla with a stunning piece of Spanish jewelry featuring pearls from the Mediterranean, designed by a contemporary Spanish artist who blended traditional techniques with modern aesthetics. Camilla reciprocated with a delicate silk scarf hand-painted with British wildflowers, created by artisans from the Prince's Trust, a charity close to Charles's heart. As the ceremony concluded, Sir Edward Morrison approached Charles with the revised schedule for the remainder of the day. The initial delay caused by the greeting confusion had pushed back several appointments, but rather than rushing to catch up, Charles made a decision that surprised his staff. "Sir Edward," he said quietly, "let's extend our private time with their majesties. Cancel the formal tour of the portrait gallery and instead invite them for tea in my private sitting room. Sometimes the most important diplomacy happens away from the cameras and ceremony." This decision reflected Charles's instinct that the genuine connection they had established was too valuable to sacrifice for rigid scheduling. Royal visits were often so packed with formal events that there was little opportunity for meaningful personal interaction between the participants. The greeting mishap had created an opening for authentic relationship building that Charles was determined not to waste. Felipe and Letizia accepted the invitation with obvious pleasure. The prospect of relaxed conversation away from protocol officers and photographers appealed to both of them. As constitutional monarchs, they spent much of their time in highly structured, formal situations where spontaneous interaction was rare. In Charles's private sitting room, adorned with personal photographs and comfortable furniture that reflected his individual taste rather than palace formality, the four monarchs settled in for what would become the most significant part of their entire visit. Without the pressure of cameras or the presence of officials, they could speak freely about the challenges and rewards of modern monarchy. You know, Letizia said, accepting a cup of tea from Camilla, when I married Felipe, I had to learn so many protocols that my head spun for months. The greeting customs alone from different countries could fill a small book. I once practiced the Japanese tea ceremony greeting for 6 hours straight before a state visit to Tokyo. Camilla laughed in understanding. I remember my first state banquet as queen consort. I was so worried about using the correct fork for each course that I barely ate anything. Charles kept shooting me reassuring glances from across the table because he could see how nervous I was. These shared stories of royal learning curves created an atmosphere of mutual support and understanding. Felipe contributed tales of his early days as crown prince, when he had to master not only Spanish royal traditions, but also adapt to the customs of dozens of other nations during official visits abroad. The truth is, Felipe said, leaning back in his chair, sometimes I think we take ourselves too seriously. Yes, protocol matters, and tradition has value, but at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to serve our countries as best we can. When Charles and I had our little dance earlier, it reminded me that perfection isn't the goal. Genuine connection is. Charles nodded emphatically. Exactly right. I've been in training for this role my entire life, and I still make mistakes regularly. But what I've learned is that people respond to authenticity much more than they do to flawless execution of formal procedures. Our subject want to see us as human beings, not just ceremonial figures. The conversation continued for over an hour, covering topics ranging from environmental conservation efforts in both countries to the challenges of raising children in the public eye. Felipe and Letizia shared insights about balancing traditional monarchy with modern democratic values, while Charles and Camilla discussed their approaches to charitable work and public service. By the time they rejoined the official program, the relationship between the British and Spanish royal couples had been transformed. What had begun as a formal state visit had become the foundation for a lasting personal friendship. The scheduled events that followed, the state banquet, the visit to Westminster Abbey, the joint appearance at the Royal Opera House, all proceeded with a natural warmth that was immediately apparent to everyone present. Members of both delegations commented privately on the unusual atmosphere of genuine camaraderie that characterized every interaction between the monarchs. Diplomatic observers noted that the relationship established during this visit would likely have lasting benefits for British-Spanish relations far beyond the symbolic value of royal diplomacy. The state banquet that evening showcased the transformation that had occurred since the morning's greeting mishap. Held in the magnificent ballroom of Buckingham Palace, with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables adorned with the finest royal china and gold plate, the dinner brought together over 150 distinguished guests from both nations. When Charles rose to deliver his formal toast, the words came from a place of genuine warmth rather than diplomatic necessity. "Your Majesties," he began, looking directly at Felipe and Letizia, "this morning you honored us with your presence, and you also honored us with your grace when formal protocol gave way to human connection. In that moment, you reminded us all that the strongest foundations for friendship between nations are built not on perfect ceremonies, but on mutual understanding and the ability to laugh together at our shared humanity." The guests, many of whom had heard whispered accounts of the morning's events, appreciated the king's candid acknowledgement of what had happened. Rather than pretending the mishap hadn't occurred, Charles had chosen to embrace it as a positive turning point in British-Spanish relations. Felipe's responding toast was equally heartfelt. "My dear friend Charles," he said, raising his glass, "you welcomed us today not just as a king receiving foreign dignitaries, but as a friend opening his home to neighbors. The warmth of that welcome, including our unscripted moment of confusion that became a moment of connection, will be remembered long after the formal words of our speeches are forgotten. Letizia and I return to Spain not just as successful state visitors, but as friends of the British royal family." The genuine emotion in both speeches was unmistakable, and several guests later commented that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a state visit that had achieved its diplomatic goals precisely because protocol had temporarily broken down in the most human way possible. The following day brought a visit to Westminster Abbey, where both royal couples participated in a service celebrating the historical connections between Britain and Spain. The Dean of Westminster had prepared remarks about the centuries of shared history, including both conflicts and alliances that had shaped both nations. But the atmosphere in the ancient abbey was one of forward-looking friendship rather than backward-looking historical grievances. During their final private meeting before the Spanish delegation's departure, Charles and Felipe exchanged personal phone numbers and email addresses, establishing direct communication channels that bypass traditional diplomatic protocols. This kind of personal relationship between monarchs was unusual, but reflected the genuine friendship that had developed from their unconventional first meeting. "You know," Felipe said as they walked through the palace gardens one last time, "I'm almost grateful for our greeting confusion yesterday. Without it, we might have maintained polite formality throughout the entire visit and missed the opportunity to really know each other." Charles smiled, remembering his initial nervousness about executing perfect protocol. "It's taught me something important about the difference between getting things right and getting things right for the right reasons. Perfect protocol would have looked better in photographs, but imperfect humanity created something much more valuable." Queen Letizia and Queen Camilla had formed their own strong connection during the visit. They discovered shared interests in literature, education initiatives, and supporting women's empowerment programs in their respective countries. They made plans for ongoing collaboration on charitable projects that could benefit from the involvement of both royal foundations. When the Spanish delegation departed from Buckingham Palace, the farewell was markedly different from the formal arrival ceremony. Instead of the careful positioning and rehearsed movements typical of royal send-offs, there were warm, spontaneous embraces and promises to stay in touch. The photographers captured images of four people who had clearly become friends, not just diplomatic acquaintances. Sir Edward Morrison, reviewing the visit in his final briefing to the king, noted that the protocol mishap had actually served the diplomatic objectives of the visit far better than flawless execution might have. The story of the greeting confusion followed by genuine laughter and friendship had been picked up by media outlets across Europe, portraying both monarchs as relatable, human leaders who could overcome minor difficulties with grace and humor. The Spanish ambassador to Britain reported back to Madrid that the visit had exceeded all expectations, establishing personal relationships that would facilitate diplomatic cooperation for years to come. He particularly noted that the informal atmosphere created by the initial mishap had allowed for more substantive conversations about trade, climate cooperation, and cultural exchange than typically occurred during state visits. In the weeks following the visit, the story of the royal greeting mishap became a favorite anecdote in diplomatic circles, often cited as an example of how authentic human moments could accomplish more than perfect protocol. Charles and Felipe maintained regular contact, discussing not just state matters, but also sharing advice about the challenges of modern monarchy. The greeting mishap that had initially threatened to embarrass both monarchs ultimately became the foundation for one of the strongest personal relationships in contemporary European royalty. It served as a reminder that in an age of careful image management and scripted public appearances, Moments of genuine human connection remain the most powerful tools of diplomacy. Years later, when historians examine the period of renewed cooperation between Britain and Spain that followed the state visit, many would trace its origins back to a simple morning in the grand entrance hall of Buckingham Palace, where two kings discovered that sometimes the best way to honor traditions is to remember the humanity they were meant to celebrate.